Thank you for that reading. I appreciate you doing that. It's good to be with you this morning. We're happy to have the opportunity. We have not been to this area, though we know some of you from the Legacy Family Camp, and Marty is one of those Bear Valley alum that we're proud to tell that he's a Bear Valley alum, and so I'm glad to spend some time with him, and we look forward to getting to know you a little bit, at least while we are here. I always tell my preaching students, you've been waiting and preparing and all week to preach, so don't get up and start with announcements and all these other things, but I think I would be remiss had I not said thank you for the opportunity. Tammy and I, a couple of years ago, moved to California for no good reason except that we had the opportunity to spend about 20 weeks a year on the road conducting a marriage seminar, and we have been very blessed by God to do that. So I am always looking at the subject of family and marriage and parenting, and every once in a while you run across some things that you find very interesting, and amongst them is some of our wedding traditions. For example, that something old, something new, something borrowed, something blue. It carries with it the idea of an honoring of the past, her upbringing. The bride looks back to something old, and then that idea of looking forward with anticipation to something new. And then there is that something borrowed carries with it the idea of fortune or luck. And then something blue, of course, her chastity or her virginity. That seems to make some sense to me, but there are some other things that I didn't realize that they had a more interesting past. For example, where the bride and groom stand at the wedding ceremony is intended so that the groom's sword hand is free if he would need to draw his weapon to defend his wife. Or the beautiful bouquet of flowers that have become customary carries with it the idea that originally they were garlic cloves and flowers intended to scare away spirits. I guess they did away with that because it scared away everybody else too. Tying the shoes to a bumper, I wondered, where did that come from? It was the practice of the father to tie the shoes of the bride to the bumper to tell the groom, basically, she is now yours. Take her shoes and her stuff and go, that kind of an idea. Oh, there are some things that are carried a little bit of mysticism, the idea of carrying a bride over the threshold, thinking that if she were to trip, that would be bad luck. There are some things that are very romantic in their symbolism. The ring that is placed upon the appropriately called ring finger. It's called that because there is a vein that runs from the tip of that finger directly uninterrupted to the heart. It is in the Latin the venus amoris. It is the love vein. All of those symbolic things tell us a little bit something about love and about marriage and about commitment and about family. And though we may not understand all of the background, we understand that they have a symbolic representation about that thing called marriage. This morning, I want to invite you to take, if nothing more than a cursory view at the most frightening book in all of the New Testament, the book of Revelation. You'll find it because not only is it at the back, but it is the book that all the pages are still stuck together as if they are brand new. It is a book that is so often misunderstood. It is a book that is often misapplied. And it has become one of the most frightening books, and it is unfortunate because I believe that with the exceptions of the books of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John that tell the story about the coming of Jesus Christ, there should be no book that is more precious. If one were to delineate one piece of inspired word from another piece of inspired word, no one book that would have greater value for you and I than is the book of Revelation. Because it is not a scary story, though it is full of great figurative language and symbolism. In fact, it is a love letter. Now, I know the thoughts of red dragons and harlots and bowls of wrath is not the typical love letter you would anticipate, but it most certainly is a love letter from the groom, Jesus Christ, to his bride, the church, to remind her that he has not forgotten her. It was appropriate in the days in which it was written because those in the first century were receiving a great deal of pressure and persecution. On the one side, there was a great religious persecution. It was coming primarily from the Jewish people who saw Christianity as a departure rather than the fulfillment of what God had promised. And so they began to be concerned. Is God still on our side? Is Jesus taking care of us after he ascended? On the other hand, there is a great political persecution. It's the political persecution of the Roman Empire, who saw Christianity as a threat because of their unwillingness to ultimately to submit to Caesar as the ultimate authority, but instead they would submit to Jesus Christ. And then there was a persecution from the world around them. It was represented by the paganism, the heathen, animalistic behavior of the world in which they lived. In other words, it was a sinful world, and that put a daily challenge on those who were Christians to be the kind of people that they were supposed to be. And those entities, those forces, are pressing around on the first century Christian, and they wondered, has Jesus forgotten his bride? Are we any longer the bride? Is he taking care of us? Has he forgotten us? Is he coming back? The book of Revelation is set forth to answer those questions, in which Jesus says, I belong to you and you belong to me. I have not forgotten you, and though I am away from you, I am still working on your behalf, and make no mistake about it, I most certainly am returning for you, so have hope. As such, this becomes an important letter for you and I as the church today, for we too feel that great pressure and persecution. On the one hand, that we have religious persecution, even from some who claim to be followers of Jesus Christ, that look at us and say, oh, I see, you're intolerant, you're insensitive, you're legalistic. You don't understand what faith and love and grace and mercy is all about. And so there is a persecution from those that claim to be religious, and some, we would even say, were our brethren. And then there is the persecution of a political world. We live in a constant state, it seems, of perpetual chaos, and it is no different as we arrive at this election year, in which we go, I don't know that our government sees things through the eyes of faith and Scripture anymore. It seems as if they've almost become contrary, and the very principles that Jesus established that we hold so dear seem to be the very things that our government stands opposed to. And our world, though not as wicked, do I believe, as the first century world, nevertheless is full with all sorts of sin. There is the constant temptation to give in or to surrender. And I think that the questions are the same on our lips today as they were in the first century amongst those Christians. Has Jesus forgotten his bride? Is he in control and taking care of us anymore? And is he ever going to come back to rescue us from this thing? And the letter of Revelation is in fact his promise. I have not forgotten you. You belong to me, and I belong to you. And though I am absent in body, I am ever present, operating and working on your behalf. And you need to know for absolute certain that I am coming back for you. Let's look at least a few things in the book of Revelation that I think will give you an understanding of this beautiful letter, and perhaps it will endear you to the point that you will spend some greater time not just looking at the symbolism, but looking at the beautiful message that is between. I want to look at it from the perception initially of the bride that belongs to Christ. It is the church that is the bride. You know, the bride of Christ is described in a variety of ways in the book of Revelation. She is described as a persecuted bride. She's described as a troubled bride in those so-called 7 churches of Asia. She is described as a bride who is waiting, a bride who is preparing. She is described as a victorious bride. By the time we get to the end of the letter, she is the eternal bride of Christ. I want you to look at her from the standpoint initially of her beauty. She is described in the very first verse of the very first chapter of Revelation. John writes the words, "The revelation of Jesus Christ, which God gave to him to show his bondservants the things which must shortly take place. And he sent and communicated by his angel to his bondservant John." Now here the church is described as the bondservant of Jesus. Not very romantic. Gentlemen, I would highly discourage you from ever writing, "To my bondservant who I love." The word actually means a slave, and in another context would in fact speak of one who is enslaved to a master, one who is possessed. But here it is a more intimate use of the word. It carries with the idea two who are joined together. It echoes the words of the Apostle Paul in 2 Corinthians chapter 11 when he said to the fact regarding the church that he had betrothed them to Christ. He repeats that same theme in Romans chapter 7, verses 4 and 6, when he talks about the idea that we are joined to Christ and that we in fact have been bound to him, a word that was used of the marriage bondage. And that's what Jesus is saying here, is he says, I am speaking to the one who I am intimately bound to, like a husband is bound to his wife. That which God has established and no man can separate. It begins with a great statement of confidence. I belong to you and you belong to me. Now, my wife is beautiful every day, even if it's that day on a Saturday she sleeps in and rolls over. She looks up at me and says, I got crazy hair, and I said, you're beautiful to me. But on the day of our wedding, she was especially beautiful. She had prepared herself, she had dressed in a gown, and she had fixed her hair and her makeup, and it was a wonderful day. She was a beautiful bride, and I didn't care if anybody else thought so or not. Because to me, she was beautiful, and that's what's so beautiful about the picture that Christ gives of his bride, is that she is not beautiful because the world thinks so. She is not beautiful because she thinks that she's beautiful. She is beautiful because Jesus Christ, her groom, says that she is. Look at why he describes her as beautiful. In Revelation chapter 7, specifically in verse 13 and following, she is described as beautiful because she has been made clean. I think it's interesting to note that the cleanliness is not just an outward apparel, but it has to do with her spiritual cleanness that has been produced by the blood of Jesus Christ himself. Listen to how Jesus, through John's pen, records it. And one of the elders answered to me, saying, These who are clothed in white robes, who are they, and from where have they come? And I said to him, My Lord, you know. And he said to me, These are the ones who have come out of the great tribulation, and they have washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb. And for this reason they are before the throne of God, and they serve him day and night in the temple. And he who sits on the throne shall spread his tabernacle over them. That's this beautiful picture. Now, let me just show you how beautiful Jesus thinks his bride is. Turn over to Revelation 21, the passage that was just read a moment ago, and listen again to what John says about the bride. It says in verse 2, And I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, made ready, listen, as a bride adorned for her husband. The language of chapter 21 also often finds its way into prose and poetry as a description of the heaven in which God resides. But in fact, the description is of the glorified eternal bride that belongs to Jesus. Look at verse 9. And one of the 7 angels who had the 7 bowls full of the 7 last plagues came and spoke with me, saying, Come here, and I will show you the bride, the wife of the Lamb. Verse 11, she has the glory of God. Her brilliance was like a very costly stone, as a stone of crystal clear jasper. And so all that figurative language that finds its way into some of our worship songs, in fact, is not a description of heaven, but is a description of the beautiful bride of Christ. And she is beautiful because she has been made clean by the blood of the Lamb. When we were joined in the water of baptism to the blood of Christ, we as the church became beautiful to Christ because we stood clean before him. As a bride who figuratively wears a white gown to show her chastity, the white robe that has clothed us is the very blood of the Lamb that cleanses us from our sin. And Jesus says that makes her beautiful to me. But he goes on to talk more about her beauty in regards to the fact that she's not just made clean once, but that she is continuing to make herself clean. Look over to Revelation chapter 3, one of those so-called 7 churches of Asia, the church in Sardis. This instruction is given to them, but it speaks to the church universal. Verse 4, but you have a few people in Sardis who have not soiled their garments, and they will walk with me in white, for they are worthy. He who overcomes shall thus be clothed in white garments. I will not erase his name from the book of life, and I will confess his name before my Father and before the angels. In other words, she was not just clothed in white, but she continues to keep herself preserved, pure, reserved only for the groom. Imagine the scene, an auditorium much like this, a wedding ceremony, the great celebration. Weddings are a wonderful day. They end in cake. That's a great day, right? And everybody's so happy, and everybody leaves, and they go out, and they go into the fellowship area, and they're having cake, and they're celebrating. The groom realizes that the time is approaching for their departure, him and the bride, but in his changing into his wedding tuxedo, he has left his all-important wallet in the pants in the back room where he changed. So he races back in there, and he opens the door, and he finds there his bride embraced in the arms of one of her old boyfriends. I'm not talking about that congratulatory kind of embrace, but I'm talking about that intimate, inappropriate embrace, especially on this, a most special day. How devastated that groom would be to find her in another's arms. That's what Jesus says. He says that those, some of them in Sardis, and those who are the beautiful bride of Christ, were not just married to Christ at baptism. They didn't just put on purity when his blood cleansed them. They continue to stay out of the arms of the sin that once was their lover. And they continue to be pure. And as such, that readying for his return by their continual purity makes her beautiful to the groom. But there's something more than that. It is beyond just simply being once made clean by the blood and continuing to make clean, because for some, their view of Christianity is this: we just need to do nothing more than keep ourselves unspotted by the world. Now, that's part of it. But there is another part, because the mindset that says, you know what we need to do? We need to dig a hole, put a chain link fence around it, razor wire on the top, go down to Walmart, get all the spam that we can, and let's just stay here and wait it out till Jesus comes, is not the picture of the beautiful bride that belongs to Jesus Christ. Look at Revelation 19, how she is described not only in the beauty of her cleanliness, but how she is described in the way in which she is preparing for the groom who is coming. In verse 7 of Revelation 19, let us rejoice and be glad and give glory to him, for the marriage of the Lamb has come, and his bride has made herself ready. And it was given to her to clothe herself in fine linen, bright and clean. Now, when my daughter got married, she was all about the preparation. I mean for months in advance. It was about a wedding dress that needed to be bought, and attendants that needed to be selected, and flowers that needed to be ordered, and cake that needed to be tasted. I mean, it was a big deal, and she was obsessed with preparations. That's what's being described here. Listen to the last half of verse 8, how it was that she was clothed in fine linen. It doesn't just refer to her purity or her continued purity. It says, for the fine linen is the righteous acts of the saints. Whereas fleeing wickedness is half of the formula, the pursuit of righteousness, right living, fulfilling what God has left us here and why he has left his bride, Jesus has left his bride here, is to continue to do the work. Marty, no extra charge for this. I don't know where you moved to, but this is free today, okay? Today in our world, there are many people, in fact, most people have no idea why they're on this big blue marble spinning out in space. They're trying to find an answer at the edge of a bottle or the edge of a ledge. They don't know why they're here. I'm going to tell you why you're here. You are here because God left you here to do his work. It makes no sense whatsoever for a groom to marry a bride and to leave her behind unless there is something for her still to do. And so it is not just waiting it out until Jesus comes. It is waiting out till Jesus comes by doing the work that he has left here for his bride. The Apostle Paul, speaking to his sweetheart church in Philippi, makes it quite clear. He says, I am torn between two things. On the one hand, for me to go and to be with God would be better for me. I mean, that's a bridegroom conversation, says I'm better to be with the groom. But he says, I remain here for you. God still has work for you and I to do. And so it is about becoming the bride of Christ at our baptism. It is about continuing to remain the beautiful bride of Christ by staying away from those sinful things. And it is about doing the thing that needs to be done. And that's what makes us beautiful to Jesus. I mentioned when when Tammy came down the stairs into our wedding. I mean, you guys have been to those weddings, right? The back door's open, those first familiar chords of that familiar song are played. Everybody stands and turns. There's at times even an audible, right? She's beautiful. She comes in and everybody, she's beautiful, beautiful. Have you ever seen such? Oh, beautiful. Look at her dress, look at her make, look at her eye. You know, I challenge you the next time you're at a wedding. It's hard to do because you're looking at the bride, but just sometimes look back at the groom when she comes into the room. His face begins to glow. He sees his wife as beautiful. Maybe by tradition he hasn't seen her in a day, though they have been spending every other moment together up until that point in time. She has made herself as beautiful as she knows how. And I mean, you can see the beauty of the bride reflected in the face of the groom. When it comes to the church and her bridegroom, what makes her most beautiful is that it is not that she is reflected in the face of the groom, but that the groom, Jesus, is reflected in her. That's what makes her so beautiful. Listen to who the groom is. He is described in Revelation 1, verse 5 as Jesus Christ. He is the faithful witness. He is the firstborn of the dead. He is the ruler of the kings of the earth. He is the one who loves us, who has released us from our sins by his own blood. He has made us to be a kingdom, priest to his God and Father. To him be the glory and the dominion forever. Verse 8 continues, of his own words, I am the Alpha and the Omega, says the Lord God, who is and who was and who is to come, the Almighty. What makes the bride so beautiful is she belongs to this groom. He has chosen her amongst all the others to be his one and only, and that makes her special. Sometimes in our marriage seminars, I note that I didn't marry Tammy because she was the one. She was the one because I married her. And that's what Jesus says. He says, here's what makes you the number one bride. Because you are the one that I have picked, I have chosen, I have selected. And that, in fact, is very good news. But within that description of Jesus, there is a reminder of the promise that he made to his bride. It's found in verse 7. Behold, he, that's Jesus, the groom, is coming with the clouds, and every eye will see him, even those who pierced him, and all of the tribes of the earth will mourn over him. So be it, or even so. That's the picture, that's the reminder of the groom has not forgotten the bride. He is coming back. We think about Jesus' words as he talked to his disciples shortly before he was arrested and ultimately crucified. He looked at them and he said, don't let your hearts be troubled. You believe in God. Believe also in me. In my Father's house there are many rooms. If it were not so, I would have told you. But I go to prepare a place that where I am, there you may be also. And if I go to prepare that place, I will come back that I might bring or draw you to myself. He says, while the bride is doing what she's to do, preparing, he's preparing for her. Now, he didn't go to build heaven. What he did was go to the cross to make heaven something that was available to us. Makes me think of an old motion picture based on a Broadway musical, The Unsinkable Molly Brown. It's kind of a fanciful historical tale about a woman by the name of Margaret Brown, a country girl who comes to the so-called big city, a mining town of Leadville. She's looking for everything wonderful in the world, and she encounters a man by the name of John or J.J. Brown. He's a miner, but though not a very successful one. He's got a hole in the ground looking for copper and silver up in the hills, and he fancies Molly. And he comes up to her and he makes an overture to her, and she basically responds with, you gotta be kidding. I'm not looking for a man whose claim to fame is an empty hole in the ground. And she begins to describe the way she sees her life. She says, I'm going to find a man that's going to build me my own house with a good roof over it. And inside that house, there's going to be a potbelly stove that's going to keep me warm in the winter. And there's going to be a room in there for my paw, and it's going to have a bed with a table next to it, and there's going to be a jug on it. Water, milk, Pepsi, something like that. And she says, and I'm going to have me one of them big brass beds. Molly went through everything in her mind that was glorious and says, that's what it's going to be. And so as the movie comes to one of its crescendos, J.J. Brown takes her on a ride, and he takes her up to his claim, and there he's built that house for her with the good roof on it. And they walk inside, and over on one side is this potbelly stove to keep her warm during the winter. She looks through one of the doors, and there's a humble, simple bed with a table next to it with a jug all waiting for her paw. And then she goes to a place in which it always wells up in your eyes, and she opens the door, and there in that bedroom is that big brass bed that he's hauled all the way up from a mountain. And he says to her, he says, Molly, whatever you want, I'll do for you. And here's what Jesus is saying to us. He said, by my very own blood, I gave my life that you might be my bride. Do you think that there is anything else that I wouldn't do? He says, I'm going to prepare a place for you. It'll be a place of warmth. It will be a place of comfort. It will be everything that you could hope and dream and imagine, and you and I will live there forever together. He promises that beautiful scene, and so the text tells us, so be ready when he returns. I wish we had the time to go over to Matthew chapter 24, Matthew chapter 25, and talk about all the principles of readiness. There are some who say, you know what, Jesus is never coming. I'm just not going to be ready for him. And they're going to be surprised as they were in the days of Noah when the bloody knuckles beat on the door of the ark demanding it be opened, but it was too late for them as the waters began to overtake the land. And then there are some, like those so-called foolish virgins, that initially said yes to the invitation to be the bride of Christ, but somewhere lost their way and weren't ready to go the full distance. But the beautiful preparation is the bride that says each and every day, I am doing what needs to be done. I am keeping myself unspotted, and I'm out the business so that when the groom comes, I will be ready, because he is most certainly coming back for me. We know that because of the promise that is made. Let's look at another passage in Revelation chapter 2 and verse 7. And just so you know, I'm well aware the time is slipping away. The pot roast is burning, but we need to talk about this before we go. Verse 7 of Revelation 2, he has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. To him who overcomes, I will grant to eat of the tree of life, which is in the paradise of God. For those of the first century, no doubt that their minds would be taken aback to that beautiful scene in the Garden of Eden. There, Adam and Eve had been put in a perfect world. They lived alongside of God as a husband and wife would, in perfect harmony. And in the center of that was a tree, the tree of life, that we know gave them physical life, but it was the representation of their connectivity, if you will, with God, who was giving them spiritual life. It was that very tree that after they ate from the forbidden tree that they were separated from. You remember God counsels with himself. This is what we're going to do with man. Man has severed his relationship by sin. If we allow him to live in the garden, he reaps from all the benefits and he'll live forever. And so God cast Adam and Eve out of the garden, and what was left inside not only Adam and Eve, but every man and woman that followed was a God-sized hole, an emptiness that can't be filled by a pill, it can't be filled by power, it can't be filled by money. And whether people realize it or not, the reason they're so empty on the inside is because God isn't living where he intended to live inside of us. And so there was a great hope for those who read the Revelation. There is a place that is coming in which the bride will reside with the groom again, and there will be the tree of life, the very paradise of God. Now, we know about paradise from the conversation that takes place while Jesus was on the cross with one of those thieves. You remember one of those thieves in a repentant heart turns to Jesus and says, remember me when you come into your kingdom. And he says, this very day you will be with me in paradise. The word heaven is not used in the Old Testament the way we do as the dwelling place of God. This very thing called paradise was that condition, that state, that place, if you will, of being with God. And that was the promise not only given to that thief on the cross, but given to you and I, that there is a time and a place for us to reside again as God always intended for us to reside. There is a nuance within the text, though, that I find quite interesting. Because that particular expression, tree of life, appears two other times in Revelation, both in chapter 22. I want to turn your attention very quickly, and then we'll close our thoughts for this morning. In verse 2, let's just start in verse 1 of Revelation 22. And he showed me a river of the water of life, clear as crystal, coming from the throne of God and of the Lamb. And in the middle of its street, and on either side of the river, was a tree of life, bearing 12 kinds of fruit, yielding its fruit every month, and the leaves of the tree were for the healing of the nations. There would no longer be a curse, that is the curse of sin and death. And the throne of God and the Lamb shall be in it, and his bondservants shall serve him. This expression, tree of life, as it has been rendered by the translators, is not literal. For the word itself is actually a word that means dry timbers. It is a word that is going to be used as well in verse 14. Blessed are those who wash their robes, that they may have a right to the tree of life and may enter it by the gates into the city. This exact same word appears in Matthew chapter 5, Matthew chapter 10, Matthew chapter 13. Your versions there probably translated as tree of life or possibly cross, as it represents the two dry timbers that were constructed to make the torture stake for Jesus Christ, where he offered his life for all mankind. The tree of life that sits in the middle of this garden is not a tree with trunk and leaves and fruit dangling from it. It is the very cross of Christ that gives us not only life, but life eternal. And as such, that thing that is very ugly ugly device that was intended to punish, for us has a glorious attraction because it represents the greatest gift the groom has ever given to his bride, and it becomes the exclamation point on what the message of Revelation is. It is Jesus' promise: you belong to me, and I belong to you. I have not forgotten you. And though I am far away, it would seem to you, the truth is I am right here, and I am working constantly on your behalf. And do not lose heart, because I am most certainly coming back for you. And as such, I believe that makes it one of the most beautiful messages in all of Scripture. By way of application, I believe the message is broad. If you are one that has not yet obeyed the gospel, been joined to the groom through the waters of baptism, where you came in contact with his blood and had those things washed away from you that you may be reconciled back to God, you are not the bride of Christ, and these promises are not for you until you become the bride of Christ. And so there is an invitation constantly on God's part, and our lips as well, that you become a child of God by obeying the gospel. Maybe you are one who stood before those witnesses and claimed Jesus as your Lord, and you confessed him as the Christ, and you were buried in the waters of baptism, but somewhere along the way you have lost your way. You have found yourself back into the arms of sin, to those other lovers that once entangled you and destined you for death. It is a day for you not to be remarried, but to be rededicated. You don't have to enter the waters of baptism again, but you need to again access the blood of Christ through your repentance. This is a beautiful time and a perfect opportunity for you to do that thing. Maybe you're one of those individuals that says, well, you know what, I've been keeping myself clean and unspotted, but I haven't been busy about the work. I've been busy about my work and the things that involve me and the things of this world, not sinful, but they have taken me away from the task that Jesus has left me to do, and I want to rededicate myself in commitment to him. Or maybe it is that you're one of those individuals that said, I am the bride of Christ, and I am keeping myself unspotted, and I am working diligently every day to do the things he's set me to do, but I've got to be honest, in those quiet places, I wonder, has Jesus forgotten us? Is it really worth it? And the answer is, it most certainly is. This morning, if there's a way that we can help you as you decide to become the bride of Christ, rededicate yourself to him, flee from those things that are wicked, or perhaps merely the prayers of encouragement, if there's a way that we can do that, we'd be more than happy to take that time. Let the pot roast burn. If there's a way that we can help you, I know of no invitation that is better than the one that is given in the Revelation itself. And the Spirit and the bride, chapter 22 and verse 17, read, say, come. And the one who hears, say, come. And the one who is thirsty, come, that he who wishes to take from the water of life without cost. If we can help you in any way, won't you come as we stand together? We're led in song.